Hey Stitchers, I thought for this video I would just do a little bit about thread conversions, how I go about kitting up my smaller projects, and just my general musings about stash really. So it's a bit of a mishmash of things. But before I get into that, I just thought I would explain to you all the reason behind my sort of online pseudonym, Mrs. Milky Bar Kid. Some of you in the UK probably might have a bit of a better grasp of why I call myself that than perhaps you guys overseas, because it's sort of based around a chocolate bar, which if you're in the States, I don't think you get Milky Bars in the States, so I thought I'd show you. So, here we go. Here's some Milky Bars. Obviously, I'm Mrs. Milky Bar Kid, so you might think that maybe I have a bit of an obsession about eating these particular bars of white chocolate, but actually I can't eat dairy, so I haven't eaten a bar of chocolate for quite some time. But the reason why I call myself Mrs. Milky Bar Kid is to do with this little character here, because I can only speak for people in the UK because I know for definite that this is the case. For years, for decades and decades on the television, when they advertised these Milky Bars, there was an iconic sort of advert, and it involved a little boy who looks just like that, with blonde hair, blue eyes and glasses, and he was in all the adverts all the way down through the decades. They'd have several different Milky Bar kids, these little boys. And my husband, who I've known since I was 5, so I can vouch for this, when he was little, he looked just like the Milky Bar Kid. Blonde, blue-eyed, wears glasses. He still looks the same, still has blonde hair, just about, blue eyes and glasses, but he's a much chunkier version now, shall we say. So he's the Milky Bar Kid, and by virtue of the fact that I've been married to him for the past 14 years, that makes me Mrs. Milky Bar Kid. So now you're probably thinking, oh my goodness, did she get married when she was 10 or something? Well, I got married when I was 20, so now you also know how old I am. So I just thought that I'd explain the reason behind my name. Obviously you can, call me whatever you like really, but you can call me Amanda, it's fine. You don't have to call me Mrs. Milky Bar Kid, but I just thought, especially for those of you that have no idea what Milky Bars are, that's what they are, and that's why I'm Mrs. Milky Bar Kid, because I'm married to the Milky Bar Kid. So there we go. So I thought, you might find that interesting, so now you know a little bit more about me than you did before you started watching this video. So anyway, on to the point of the video, to talk about cross stitch, not about chocolate. Thread conversions. I know Jan at Thread Garden sort of asked me how I do my thread conversions and to talk a little bit about it. It does move in quite nicely to how I kit up my projects, because obviously as much as I possibly can, I do try and stitch from my stash, so obviously I do change threads a lot from what's required in the pattern. I kind of view charts as only a suggestion really. That's how I go about things. So obviously with conversions there's several different types. You can have cotton to cotton conversions, silk to silk conversions, silk to cotton conversions, and my favourite, cotton to silk conversions. Now I've done all of those types of conversions. In fact I do them a lot of the time when I'm stitching. So at your most basic level, I would say for your cotton conversions, obviously there's the whole anchor to DMC, DMC to anchor approach to conversions. As you know, I have almost a full set of anchor threads and 80–85% full set of DMC threads. So quite often when I'm kitting up smalls, I will use anchor threads because I'm just trying to sort of run those threads down, to be honest. I don't replace them as and when I finish a skein, because obviously I'm more of a DMC stitcher, although my DMC stash is mainly used for my Heaven and Earth designs and a few other little bits and pieces. I do mix and match anchor and DMC. One thing I will say, if you are converting DMC threads to anchor threads, is to bear in mind that there are more DMC threads than there are anchor threads. So when you're doing a conversion, because obviously you can get official conversions, if you just do a Google search, I'll probably link to the ones that I use. Obviously you can get tables which show you the conversions from anchor to DMC and vice versa. You will find that for some shades of DMC, two different shades of DMC could be converted to just one anchor thread, because there just aren't the amount of anchor colours. I can't remember the difference now, but I know several times when I've done conversions, you go to convert a DMC into an anchor thread, and the same anchor thread is used for two different colours of DMC. So sometimes you just kind of have to eyeball it a bit, really. I've got absolutely no problem in mixing anchor and DMC threads in the same design, but I do have some caveats to that. Obviously, I would never convert a heaven and earth design into anchor threads, because it just would not look right at all. So any sort of design that uses a lot of shading of colours, you know, a lot of the same colours, similar colour palette of the same colours, I wouldn't bother. I wouldn't mix DMC and anchor. I probably wouldn't convert it. If it was originally charted in DMC, I probably wouldn't convert something that's quite highly shaded into anchor, because you just would not get the same effect. However, if you're stitching a design that's quite, I would say maybe blocky, or it's quite obvious to distinguish one colour from another, I've got a few examples that I've kitted up, then obviously if all you need is a red, green, yellow and blue thread, it's not really going to matter whether it's anchor or DMC. When you're just looking at the colours, you go with what looks best for you. So if it looks good to you mixing anchor and DMC, I do it, it looks fine to me, then it's all about the colours, really. It doesn't really matter what brand of thread you use. I know some people are quite strict about not mixing DMC and anchor, but you know, I do it all the time for certain types of patterns. I'm sort of thinking of patterns like, when I say blocky, I'm thinking of things like Lizzie Kate's, you know, Bent Creek, that sort of style, where you just wouldn't, there's no sort of blends of colours at all. It's quite, you know, definite what colours are used. That's what I mean by blocky. I don't necessarily mean the stitching, but just the colours used. It's quite easy to pick out one from another. I just find DMC colours are actually better, to be honest. I know last year when I kitted up Jane Elliott's Medieval Lady, which I showed you in one of my recent videos, a fabric video, I think. Obviously, when you have a chart from a magazine, it will usually give you, in the UK anyway, it will give you the DMC colours, which is what the chart was originally designed for, and it will give you the anchor conversion. And I know when I did a floss toss, I knew that I had all the colours, the anchor colours, so I pulled them from my stash, and when I compared them to the DMC colours were just better. They were just brighter, and they just, I can't put my finger on it, but they just look better to me. So I chose to use the DMC. So it is very much on a chart by chart basis what I decide to do with that sort of basic level of conversion, DMC to anchor. But as I say, I do like to stitch from my stash as much as I can, and so I'm trying to run down those anchor threads. Then of course other cotton to cotton conversions could be you have a DMC, but you want to use another overdyed cotton, so for example Gentle Arts sampler threads, or Weeks Dye Works, or Colour Works, what Crescent Colours used to be called. So in that case, obviously there's no official conversions. As I say, I do have quite a lot of threads in my stash, so for me, sometimes what I will do, I will pull the DMC colours that the chart calls for, and I'll just match them up with gasts in my stash. Or, you know, I might go completely different, might pick completely different colours than what's charted. So there's no sort of hard and fast rules, really. Where I can, sometimes, like I say, I will use an official conversion chart, so like anchor to DMC. But to be honest, most of the time I just look in my stash, see what I've got and go with that. I have, as you all know by now, I've got absolutely no problem or issue in changing colours, and I will, as I say, endeavour to use my stash as much as I can. There's no point having all the threads that I've got and not, you know, making the full use of them, really. So that's what I try and do. As I've said before in my silks video, if you're looking to convert from DMC to silk threads, so obviously you're talking solid colours in that case, I don't think you can do any better than to use hand-dyed fibres silks for that conversion. I just think they're brilliant, and I know I've said that enough, so I've gone on about that. But I just think they're the best silks to use. As I say, they're one of the only silks that have the full range of DMC colours in those silks, and HDF silks, so I just think they're, you know, really good silk to use. Obviously I've done the silk to cotton conversions with my Chinese garden chatelaine. Some of them Martina had done, obviously, but things like the pearl threads, because obviously they're used, I showed you in the silks video, you can get silk pearls, you know, Gloriana, Princess, Petite pearls, all those type of things. They would have been used in Chinese garden, but I didn't want to use silk pearls, so I just eyeballed the colours and bought some just solid anchor number 12 pearls. So a lot of it is done me just going with what I feel looks right, really. You have to have that bit of confidence to know that if something looks good, then it's fine. You shouldn't feel that you're tied to what the chart says necessarily. If that's not your thing, you know, go with what you feel looks right for you. So my conversions, the things that I do, are a bit of a mishmash, really. There's nothing original about it. It's just me looking at what I think looks good. As I said, it is hard if you don't have a lot of threads yourself to sort of do it. Look online, because I mean, the majority of us, I should think, don't have access to an LNS, a local needlework shop. I don't. I've never really been in a shop at all where I've had, you know, that array of threads before me to choose from. So it does make it very hard if you are doing conversions or trying to do a conversion, and all you've got is what's on the computer monitor when you're looking at, you know, so and so or 123 Stitch, or the other online shop in Italy whose name escapes me right this second. I'll kick myself for not remembering it, but yeah, you know what I mean. So wherever you buy your threads online, it is hard if you're just looking at computer monitors. But I just think you should go with the courage of your convictions, and if you think something looks right, go for it. I mean, more often than not, I will try and shoehorn in the colour purple into everything I do, hence why I have quite a lot of purple threads. But yeah, just go with what suits you. So to sort of show you the type of things that I like to do, I just thought I'd try and quickly show you the smalls I've kitted up. Now I will warn you, my version of smalls probably isn't the same as a lot of people. When I talk about smalls, I'm talking about small in comparison to chatelaines and Heaven and Earth designs. So usually my rotation, as I've said, I basically have a slot for each week in the month, so I don't usually try and have more than 4 or 5 whips at a time. So currently at the moment, one of my whips is the Primitive Hare Red Riding Hood. Once that one's done, then it'll be something from this bag that I will pick. So I basically keep all my whip materials and projects that I've kitted up. They're all in a bag, in this bag here. So I know where to go, where to look for them. So lucky dip time. Let's pick one out at random. Yeah. Now, as you know, the majority, well, all of my charts really, are PDF format, as much as I can get them that way. So I don't actually have the patterns to show you, so I'll just put up a photo of them as I talk about them. So the first one out of the box is the Snow White Biscornu pattern from Cloud's Factory. For some reason I decided to kit this one. I kitted this one up and I put the threads in a bobbin box, even though there's not many of them. So those are just the colours. I think what I did was I kitted up, put all the threads together for the Alice in Wonderland Biscornu that I did and the Snow White Biscornu, and then I've just taken out the threads that I don't need for Snow White, so that's probably why they're in a bobbin box. So I think these are all anchor threads. I didn't do the conversion myself because I think, if I remember rightly, the conversion to anchor threads was provided with the chart. But as usual, as is my wont, I've put in some of my beloved treasure braids, because obviously there's not enough metallic in this chart for me, so just like I did with the Alice in Wonderland, I've just bling it up with some, there's another brand of metallic I use as well, Glisten Gloss Madeira, but I'll talk about that in another video. Yeah, so that's all together in there, and the fabric I've chosen for this one is a 28 count 28 count Jobelan from a Pole Stitches grab bag. So the two squares of the Biscornu will fit on there, and I usually, when I kit up, because I don't know why I do this, but it just makes it quicker when you start, I suppose. I always mark, depending on the type of chart, I will either mark the middle on the piece of fabric, or more often than not it will be the top left hand edge. that I'll mark, so I know straight away when I start stitching that's where to start from. I do find that I go through phases of kitting up designs. Sometimes I just feel in the mood to rummage through my stash. Other times I just want to get on and stitch stuff, which is why I have a few things ready kitted up for either when there's a gap in my rotation or when I feel like a change. So that is Cloud's Factory Snow White Biscornu, kitted up, ready to go at some point. Next is a design that I can't actually show you the pattern or the chart in any way really, because there's not a front sheet to the chart. It's a PDF chart, and it's a chart that's available through the Jodie Designs Facebook group page. It's a chart available there as a freebie that you can download, and it's a butterfly quote, and what it says, I've written it down because it's on my iPad so I can't look at it and film at the same time. The quote says, "Just when the caterpillar thought the world was over, it became a butterfly." And the word butterfly is actually in the shape of a butterfly. Now I've had this sort of kitted up. It's not even really properly kitted up. The problem is I keep changing my mind about what threads I want to use, because of course every month I get my little package of Jodie Designs threads, and each month I think, oh, that's a really nice thread, I could use that for this pattern. So yeah, currently at the moment, these are my thread choices. I always knew what colour I wanted the word caterpillar to be and what colour I wanted the word butterfly to be. It's the other words. Basically on the pattern, they're quite chunky words. So it's all straight up cross stitch, nothing fancy. But for the word butterfly, I wanted to use this thread, which is now called Over the Rainbow, I think, but I've got one of the older ones, which is called Rascal the Rainbow. So you can see all the pretty colours in that one. Again, these are cottons, Jodie Designs cotton threads. So I knew I wanted that one for the word butterfly, and I also knew for the word caterpillar, I wanted to use this thread, which, funny enough, is called Poisoned Apple. But it's sort of red and green, and it reminded me of, you know, the children's book, The Hungry Caterpillar. When I think of caterpillars, I sort of think of green and that red face. So I knew I wanted to stitch the word caterpillar in that thread. So they haven't changed. What changes is all the other words. Currently at the moment, my favourite for this chart is to use this Jodie Designs thread, which is called Land, Sea and Sky, which is sort of a nice grey, blue, green colour. But as I say, subject to change. Again, I've also changed my mind. I don't know why I do this. This is why I haven't stitched it, because I know it's not quite right in my mind yet. I'm not quite satisfied with my choices. Initially, I cut a piece of 28 count cashel linen, and what I was going to do was stitch it over one, but then I changed my mind because I thought I really wanted the variegated threads to stand out really, and over one stitching you wouldn't get as much as a thread as much of the thread as you would if you were stitching over two on 28 count. So you can see I will mark the corner as I do, but what I think I'm going to do instead is stitch it over two on 36 count linen, because at the time when I kitted this up, that's how long ago it was, I hadn't tried 36 count linen. Of course now it's one of my favourites and I've got metres of it in my stash, so that's what I'm going to do, and I want to make a cushion out of it. But once I get settled on my choices, I will definitely stitch that one. It's, you know, it's a really lovely chart, and I love the sentiment behind it, so I do want to get on and stitch that. Next in my little pile of smalls is designed by the Primitive Hare. This time it's a companion piece to Red Riding Hood. This one is Sleeping Beauty. This one I actually haven't changed anything about it at all. I've stuck with Isabella's original DMCs and the gasts that she charted for it. So this one just uses, I mean, it's a primitive design, it's a primitive hare, so it's not going to have anything bold and striking in it. So you can see you can see from the picture, but you can see from the DMCs that are in there the sort of tones that it's going for. And the other fancy threads that it uses, not fancy, but speciality threads or whatever you want to call them, is some Gentle Art sampler thread in corn husk, and one is in Banker's Grey. Now one supplier that I haven't actually mentioned that I do use, there's the Banker's Grey there, so those are the only two special threads. Yeah, one of the suppliers that I haven't mentioned that I do use is the Patchwork Rabbit, UK based company, but obviously she will ship worldwide. But one really good thing is that Carla, who owns the Patchwork Rabbit, she has wonderful, beautiful charts as well. If you're into sort of like primitive designs, if you're in the UK and you're into like primitive designs, you know, you like Little House Needleworks, those type of designs, you know the type I mean. She has the best range of charts for those style of designs. She has charts that so-and-so don't even have. Of course, what I'm talking about now, I'm talking really to the UK stitchers that watch this and European stitchers, because you guys in the States, you already have everything anyway. But for us UK stitchers and European stitchers, her prices for Gentle Art sampler threads, for Weeks Dye Works and for Colourworks, what used to be Crescent Colours, whatever they're called now, the best prices in the UK. They're cheaper than so-and-so. I wrote it down just to remind myself to tell you. So-and-so will charge you £2.15 for a skein of, for example, Gentle Art sampler thread, which is obviously a 5 yard, ordinarily is a 5 yard skein. So £2.15, I think, at so-and-so. Carla, Patchwork Rabbit, £1.60. So if you use these type of threads a lot, Gentle Art threads, Weeks Dye Works, Crescent Colours, etc., that's the cheapest place to go for those particular threads. And the other excellent thing is that for some of those threads, not all of them, she will do a 10 yard skein, which is even cheaper again. So a 10 yard skein is £2.50. So, you know, you get a lot more for your money than you would if you go to so-and-so for those threads. So I just thought I'd mention that because, you know, threads are expensive and I just like to know that I'm getting the best bargain, and Carla is fantastic. In fact, it's through her that I'm ordering my Scarlet Letter sampler, so she's really happy to get things in for you if she can. And as I say, her prices for these threads are fantastic, and if you do stitch a lot of Lizzie Kate's, you know, the type of designs I mean, then you can save quite a bit of money. Also, for any of you guys, you know, in Europe, on the continent, she'll ship to you, and obviously you don't have to worry about import, you know, VAT, tax, handling charges, all that type of thing. So I just thought I'd mention that in case it's helpful to anybody. Yeah, so I got sidetracked there, didn't I? Sleeping Beauty Primitive Hair, and again, exactly the same fabric that I'm stitching Red Riding Hood on, 36 count cream Edinburgh linen. So that's that one. I don't know if I'll start this one straight after Red Riding Hood, because I don't always like to stitch the same sort of designs in a row. Sounds a bit strange, but I know that Isabella's got obviously other designs in that fairy tale series. I think she said the next one she's doing is Snow White, but I'm sure definite about that. But there'll be other ones in the series which again I will be buying and kitting up. The next one, I think I've shown you this before. I still haven't started it yet. It's the Lizzie Kate Living with Charms series. Again, this one's a bit different, as I said, because I've got all the charts in paper form in these. Fabric in this one is actually, unusually for me, it's Permin or Witch Out Linen. I managed to find half a metre of it on eBay for £5, which is really cheap, so I thought, oh, that would be ideal for that design. So that's what I've got, and you probably all know the threads that are in it. Got Weeks Dye Works, Begonia, Chestnut, Collards, and Guacamole, is that one? Yep. Huckleberry, the lovely blue colour. Moss, Navy, Tea Frost, Tea Rose, which is another of my favourite gas, and Williamsburg Red. So that one again is being stitched exactly as per the charts. I don't have any issues with that. I think I did actually, doesn't always happen very often, but I did specifically get those threads, partly because Patchwork Rabbit sells them fairly cheaply by comparison, but also at the time I think Carla had a 20% off sale, so I thought that would be the ideal time to buy them. That's kind of how I handle my stash, really. I have, I'm always quite aware of the charts that I have in my stash that might require special threads or items, and so when I see a sale or, you know, something like that, then I make the most of it by kitting up charts in my stash. I mean, I'm not a person that kits up every single chart I own. I know some stitchers do that. It's absolutely fine. As soon as they get a chart, they'll kit it up. I'm not one of those stitchers for reasons I will explain in a moment. Next, in my little, this is quite a, now when I talk about conversions, this is an ideal example to show you. And this chart, another small that I've got, it's not really small at all, but it's by the Drawn Thread and it's called the Butterfly Garden. So that's one reason why I wanted to stitch it. The other reason is it contains lots of speciality stitches. Now originally this was charted in for the following types of thread. If you look at the back, it was quite good because it gave you a silk set of materials and also a cotton set of materials, which I thought, was, really good. You could either choose to spend the money on silks or choose to spend the money on cottons. So I looked at the list and I thought, well, actually I've got a few on each of those sides, but I just couldn't be bothered to mix and match what was there really. I just wanted one brand of floss, or two at the most, that I could use in this design. So what I decided to do, instead of using, I chose straight away that decided that I would use cottons instead of silk. For no particular reason other than you don't actually in this design, and I know because I've stitched other drawn thread pieces, most of the time you're actually only using a single strand of thread, and I just thought, buying these threads that I don't have was pointless when I have a shed load of my own silks and cottons, when you're only using a tiny amount really. So what I decided to do instead was I kept the DMCs as they were. You can see there was you could either stitch the solid colours in NPI silks, or it gave a DMC. So I stuck with the DMC. I pulled them from stash, although I have a feeling, looking at all the threads that I picked from my stash for it, I have mixed up the DMCs and the anchors together. I've got no problem with that. So I obviously looked at that DMC list and thought, right, I've got most of those, but there were the odd few that I didn't have, so I just picked the anchor, because for this design it's really not going to matter. It's sort of, again, sort of blocks of colours. There's no blending, there's no shading involved, so that's what I did. And then when it came to the hand dyes, I thought, well, why not use my Jodrell Designs threads? So that's what I did. I mean, as I say, I had some of the Threadworks and I had some of the Dinky Dye silks. I'm not really a fan of, for some reason, although I have some in my stash, I'm not really a fan of Thread Gatherer Silk and Colours, so there's no way I was going to go and buy those silks. If it had been a brand I loved, I might have been tempted, but I don't like those silks, so I thought, whatever. So what I did, basically this pattern is different, each section are different types of flowers. So what I did is I googled the flowers, saw what colours were involved, and then I just went through my Jodrell design stash and picked out, relevant colours that match those flowers. So as I say, not an exact science by any means, but that's kind of the way I roll. So in here, I won't get them out to show you. There's my little scribblings about what I'm going to swap for what. But yeah, so I just, picked out threads from my stash to use instead. As it happened, I did have a little bit of one of the water lilies that it called for, so I put that on just in case. But I was thinking that I might use that Jodrell Designs thread, Wicked Witch of the West, is it? Yeah, instead. So you can see the colours are very similar, but that's kind of what I do. So that's a good example, if you can call anything I do a good example, of how I kind of manage kitting up really with the stash that I already have. I try where I can to use what I've got. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to have it there, so I will try and use it. So I'm actually quite looking forward to doing that chart. It's got all sorts of different stitches on, and I really like their designs. And again, that one will be stitched on 36 count linen. This was the pattern that made me think about stitching on 36 count, because it requires quite a length of fabric. It's 355 stitches wide by 59 stitches tall, so it calls for 34 count linen cut to 10 inches by 27 inches, so it's quite long. So if I tried to stitch it on 32 count or 28 count, it would have been bigger than a fat quarter. I would have needed to buy a fat half metre really and cut it down, and that just seemed a waste. But as it happened, I struck lucky on eBay with my bargain Edinburgh linen metre of fabric, so actually it proved quite easy to cut the fabric for that. So that's that one, drawn thread with all my bits and pieces of thread. Now are we nearing the end of this? Oh, one more. This again is by one of my favourite designers. I've showed you some of her works that I've done, the Sampler Girl. This one is taken from a magazine called The Gift of Stitching, which is no longer available. It ran for quite a few years, and I have every single issue because it was a fantastic magazine. It was PDF only, and the threads used in the patterns, the designers that were featured in the magazine were just, sorry, just moving the camera. They were designers you've actually heard of. I don't want to sound rude or anything. That's very British of me. But when you look at designers in the UK cross-stitch magazines, the majority, I'm not talking Jane Elliott here, but the majority of designers that they use, you only ever see their name in cross-stitch magazines. You don't see them having patterns in their own name sold in other shops. But when I got the Gift of Stitching magazine, there were people in there that I knew. When I saw their name, I knew what they designed. Like, for example, Tracy Horner from Ink Circles. There's quite a few of her designs that feature in the Gift of Stitching. So, for example, you might have seen the design The Bramble and the Rose. That's quite a famous Ink Circles piece. Well, I've got the pattern for that because it was in the Gift of Stitching magazine. And Brooks Books Publishing, quite often she had things in there. Chatelaine, Martina designed a chatelaine specifically for the magazine. But it was a fantastic magazine, and I was really sad when it ceased publication. The reason why it did, in part, was because of the thing we all love to hate, piracy, really. Needlework piracy, people just uploading the magazine online so you could download it for nothing, because obviously people think these things are free, but they're not. It takes hard work and a lot of effort to produce these things. But anyway, I don't want to go on a rant about that. The point of that is to say, this design I got from the Gift of Stitching magazine. So you've seen the picture. As far as I can remember, this design was all charted for DMC, and again I've done my usual of mixing up DMC and Anchor to kit it. And the other thing that I did, because it was all charted just for solid floss, quite often in her designs the Sampler Girl does use Gentle Art Sampler thread, Weeks Dye Works, those type of threads for that kind of primitive antique type of feel. And what I like to do quite often, if I see designs like that do suit those threads, I will try and use them. Specifically if there's blocks of colour. So I think in this design, off the top of my head, trying to remember, there's like a house and brickwork and lettering. I quite often like to use sort of a thread with a different effect for lettering, because it shows up really well if you're using either a variegated thread, obviously, or something that's sort of been gently over dyed, as the Gentle Art Sampler threads are. So you'll see I've picked out elements in that design, and I've dug up some gasts from my stash. So for example, it calls for DMC 733, don't know if you can see, and in there I've got avocado Gentle Art Sampler thread, which matches, but it's got, that slight variegation, something a bit different. And again, this is another one of my favourite. I haven't got very much of it left, I should get some more really. It calls for DMC 3768, and I've picked out Black Raspberry Jam from my Gast stash because I just really love the colour. I think it's a really interesting thread, so I must get some more of that. And again, I've done the same thing. It calls for DMC, so 420. I've picked out a Cider Mill Brown from my stash. So you can see the colours are similar, but it just gives a little different effect. And the last one, this one again is an Anchor thread. I've obviously converted from the original DMC. The Anchor is 1015, but I found a Gentle Art Sampler thread that's very similar. So again, you can see there how I do my sort of thread conversions. Really, they're not really. I don't see them as conversions. I don't know. I see them as a way to use up my pretty threads. But yeah, so I think it's safe to say I like to do my own thing. And again, I've cut the fabric and it's all, I was going to say it's all hemmed and ready to go. It's not hemmed. I obviously need to have a little session with my sewing machine. But this is Annabelle fabric that I talked about that I love. And again, I've marked the top edge of the design so I know that I can start stitching on that straight away. Again, this one's been kitted up for a while. It's just been waiting for a gap in my rotation, but stuff keeps coming along and getting in the way as it does. So there you go. Those are my little smalls that I've got kitted up. So it kind of gives you an idea really of the way I do things if you haven't got enough of an idea already after all these hour-long videos I keep putting up there on YouTube. But as I say, I do things differently to a lot of people. And I love my stash, but we are all different, which is a good thing, I think. Not every stitcher has a stash for various reasons. Either they don't have the space to store the stash, or you know, it's just not in their sort of nature to stash things, because I do think that part of this whole need to stash, it does very much depend on your personality. I know I'm a bit of a collector in the sense that I like to have the whole series of things. I'm the same with books, you know, if I have one in a series I have to have all of them, and it's the same, I know it's the same with charts and things that I've seen. I like to have all of them in a set. Some people are just not that way inclined, which to be honest is an advantage in some ways. But I think, you know, that's what makes stitching interesting. We're all different. But I do think, I mean, I don't know for sure, but when I've watched the rest of you, you've done your stash videos, which are always really interesting. It's always good to see what other stitchers have in their stash. I do think that my stash is a bit different to everybody else's, or maybe it's the same as yours, but you just haven't put a video up yet, which is why I don't know. But you've probably noticed that in my stash there is a distinct lack of kits. I don't do kits. I'm not a kit stitcher at all. Absolutely nothing wrong with kits at all. They're just not for me. Probably the reason why, the biggest reason why, is that probably 90% of kits use Ada as their fabric, and that's not really a fabric I like to stitch on nowadays. So, I mean, I could swap out the fabric, but it would just seem a bit of a waste to me. I'd have to really, really love the chart, and to be honest, I've never seen a kit that I felt that way about. And generally, the type of designs that I like to stitch don't come in a kit form. Kits don't very often have, you know, speciality threads and all that type of thing, which is what I enjoy stitching. So that's why I choose to stash the type of things that I stash. I realised very early on, when I picked up cross-stitching again 4 years ago, that there would be no point me amassing kits or charts for that matter, because I knew that my taste would change, and I would hate to have, you know, collected loads and loads of charts and then look at them and think, actually, I don't want to stitch a single one of these things because my taste has changed, and I know I'm that type of person. And so I'm quite glad that I didn't stash tons of charts when I started stitching, because as you've seen from my stitching journey video, my sort of leaning towards speciality stitches, all the type of things I like to do, I would have had no clue about that when I first started stitching. So that's why with charts, as you know, I've already said, if I see a chart that I like, it goes on my wish list. I don't kind of impulse buy. There are some charts, I can think of 2 off the top of my head, that won't even make it to my wish list because I know I desperately want to stitch them. But that's because I've known about them for months, and I've known that they are absolutely top of my list to stitch, and that will be, as I mentioned, Northern Expressions Needlework Twisted Rainbow Sampler, and when Martina gets around to releasing it, the Sparkling Rainforest Mandala. I know that those are 2 designs that I want to stitch. But the reason why I have a wish list is because it helps me to sort out in my own mind what I really want to stitch, and the designs that I feel that I might be sort of jumping on the bandwagon to stitch because everybody else is stitching them, if you know what I mean. So it helps me to think about what I want to stitch. So as far as charts go, paper charts that is, my collection of paper charts are in this, there's not very many in there at all, in this concertina file. You know, there's not much in there, it's quite meagre. And as for my collection of cross-stitch magazines, I turfed out a load, chucked away a load, and basically all the ones that have designs that I want to stitch in, so a lot of these are Joan Elliott's, those are the ones I keep. So that's all the paper charts that I have. Admittedly, I have a lot on my hard drive. You've already seen my collection of Heaven and Earth designs, my chatelaine designs, but also on there I've got some sampler girl charts, Northern Expressions needlework charts, but I've got literally hundreds of legitimate, I like to say that just so you all know, freebies from various designers which are amazing and wonderful. You've seen a few of the freebies that I've stitched, and also, as I said, I've got probably 70 odd issues of the Gift of Stitching magazine, so that kind of keeps me going. I'm never short of charts. So I realised, the whole point of me saying this is that, as I say, I realised that for me, I would never be a chart collector because I knew my taste would change, but I knew that I would always want fabric and threads. Regardless of what charts I wanted to stitch, I would always need those, which is why, probably explains why I've amassed fabric, a bit of fabric, but a lot of threads. As I said in my silks video, I do kind of see my thread collection as a separate hobby in itself. I am a bit of a collector that way, but I do use those threads. I was going to work out, of the finishes that I've had this year, how many I actually had to buy stash for, and I think I only specifically went out of my way to buy stash for the Twisted Band sampler. Everything else I've stitched, I think I've just managed to cobble together stuff from my stash. But as I say, we're all different. I don't think it really matters what if you collect hundreds and hundreds of charts. I know stitchers that have hundreds and hundreds of just Heaven and Earth designs charts. You know, if that's what you choose to do, you know, that's your thing. You probably look at me and think, why has she got all those threads? You know, you can't use them all at once, which is true. But you know, that's my thing. I know I have issues with my threads, but that's kind of my thoughts on my stash, really, how my stash works. So when I think of stash, I think of fabric and threads because I can always use those. I'm never going to get bored of the colour purple, so I'm never going to look at, you know, all the purple threads I've got in my stash and think, oh no, I've really gone off that. Whereas I know what I'm like. Probably a lot of the charts, if I bought a lot of charts and kits at the start of my stitching, I'd be looking at that now and thinking I've got to get rid of it because it's just not me at all. So I just choose to pick my projects on a sort of case-by-case basis, my special projects, by which I mean projects that I will buy the necessary stash for. So for example, the Mirabilia red, I will buy the necessary stash for that. I won't try and cobble together conversions. I only have, you know, I sort of have about maybe 3 or 4 projects in the year where I will do that, specifically buy the stash for that project. Everything else kind of gets stitched from stash, whatever I've got really. Yeah, so that's my thoughts on my stash, and how my stash works for me really. I do find it helpful to have a stash budget, not only just to keep control on the spending, because you can go crazy and buy everything, but also again it helps me to figure out what I really want to stitch and not just what everybody else is stitching, if that kind of makes sense. And also it's good to have a balance between buying for me, a balance between buying charts and kitting charts, because if you went, I'm talking about me now, when I say you I mean me, if I went crazy and bought all the charts I liked, that would leave me no money in my stash budget to actually kit them up and stitch the things. I'd be buying charts and not actually being able to kit them. So I find it helps to have a balance with buying charts and actually getting together the materials, because for some of the things I like to stitch can be quite expensive, so I do try, you know, I've built up this stash of threads and fabric, so I do like to try and use it where I can. Yeah, so those are my little thoughts on stash and how I go about my personal stash. Everybody does it differently, so you know, I'm always interested to hear, you know, if you're not a stasher, you know, let me know, or if you're a chart stasher, you know, I don't think we should have any sort of shame. You know, we're all adults, and you know, as I said, there are worse things in the world to collect than, you know, charts, threads, fabric. So I do think stashing is a hobby in itself. I know my thread obsession is. But yeah, I'd be really interested in any comments you've got about how you feel about your stash, or how you get your stash to work for you. Maybe some little tips and tricks that you have in that regard. So yeah, I'm always interested to hear, any of your views and opinions on the things I talk about, even if they're drastically different to mine. I think it's all interesting. That's how we all learn. And I'd just like to say thank you to all of you for all the comments. Particularly, I really enjoyed reading all your comments when I did my video about my stitching journey. I found it really interesting. When you said, some of you said, that's something I'd like to try, or I know Tanya mentioned in her video that she wanted to, try hard hanger, and she's bought some charts and things, and I just think that's really great that some of you have thought about different things that you can do to sort of broaden your stitching a bit. And as I said, it's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to do that, and that's what makes stitching great, because we all love stitching regardless of how we go about it and what we stitch. But it's the fact that we all enjoy it, and we recognise that in each other, in the fact that it doesn't matter if I'm stitching something that you look at and you think, oh, I would never stitch that, I would never have that in my house. But although you might not like the design, you can appreciate as a cross stitcher yourself the amount of work and effort and things that go into all the different pieces that all of us make. So, and that's the great thing about stitching, and about being able to share that kind of passion that we all have for stitching with each other, regardless of the type of designs that we like to stitch. So there you go, those are my thoughts for today. Take them or leave them, probably leave them. Yeah, so I just thought I'd just talk about that, my little stash musings. So I think the only video I have left to do of the ones that I sort of initially wanted to do when I started out on this whole YouTube journey is one more stash video on my cottons, pearls and metallics. So I'll do that one next week, and then after that will just be my update videos, my whips, unless I've got any other exciting news to tell you. Or if perhaps you can think of another topic you want me to do a video on, then again just comment and let me know. So thank you to all of you for watching another long video. This video I thought, it would only take 20 minutes. I'll just show my my kitted up projects, no problem, but we're already at almost 50 minutes, so don't worry, there won't be many more of these long videos left, so that'll please you all, I'm sure. Yep, so that's it. So I'll just say for now, thanks for watching and happy stitching.